Juan Rios, who will give us a perspective from Iberdrola that operates in Europe, North America, and South America, and thinking about the pathway to net zero as far from an Iberdrola perspective. Juan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. So first of all, let me thank DSO, Euroelectric, and EPRI the opportunity you are giving to us to introduce how we manage grids resiliency and the challenges of the energy transition at Iberdrola Networks. In Iberdrola network business, we own and operate transmission and distribution networks in 4 countries: Spain, the UK, the US, and Brazil. And we deliver electricity to more than 30 million customers. So the situation in each country is quite unique. So in terms of the challenges that weather events pose to the electricity networks, in terms of how effectively an electricity network respond to these challenges, but the responses are relatively similar. So in terms of making the grid more resilient and addressing the energy transition targets in our operations and mainly in our capital plans. So let's start. Next slide, please. So let's start with the increasing impact of extreme weather events in the economy. So more studies indicate that the severity of climate change has increased in the last decade. So we are showing here the expected total GDP loss caused by the extreme weather. Okay, and you see here the increase mainly in the US. So electricity supply is one of the most affected services and an important driver of these economic losses. So we do believe that this, in Iberdrola, clearly we do believe that the increasing number of severity of climate events is due to climate change. So we expect the trend to continue and the impact on GDP to be larger unless we do something different to what we have been doing in decades. Okay. So moreover, the electricity transition also requires electrification and makes electricity even more essential. So resiliency and grid hardening will become even more critical, not only because of the more frequent weather events, but also for the higher dependency on electricity. So next slide, and we're going to show 3 weather events in one in Spain, the UK, and the last one in the US. The first one is in always sunny and warm Spain. Okay, so this is from January last year, and that was well, 1 in a century event. So we had 36 hours of snow in the central area of Spain, also in Madrid, the city of Madrid. Okay, that at the end meant more than 50 centimeters of snow, something which is absolutely extremely unusual. After that, we have 2 weeks of very low, very unusual low temperatures, and well, that was the situation. So the impact, we calculate the impact to be in terms of economic losses of circa 1 billion euros. Okay, and what happened with the grid? So well, most of the area that was impacted belonged to us. Okay, and we had well, it should be around 5 million customers in our area, 5 million supply points in our area that were impacted by the storm, but and we had an impact in terms of losses. Okay, of 270 K customers. Okay, but and now here comes the good news. So thanks to automation and grid digitation, we were able to recover 70% in less than 30 minutes, and well, so there was 98% of the customers were recovered in less than 10 hours. In less than 10 hours. So we move on to the next event, and the next slide, please. So we expect to have more storms in the UK than in Spain, although not the kind of storm Arwen that we suffered at the end of last year. So we had very deep low pressures at the Baltic Sea that meant very high winds moving southwards from the Atlantic Ocean that create, well, huge problems in the whole island. So this has been one of the worst events in 25 years, and in the UK, we had more than 1 million customers affected in the UK. And well, in our service territory, we have circa 200K customers affected. Okay, in terms of the, let me find in terms of the recovery rates. So in the UK, the whole UK, 83% were recovered in 24 hours. Although we had some in the UK, some customers that didn't have the service in 11 days. And in the case of Scottish Power Energy Networks, in Iberdrola, we were able to restore 89% of our customers in 24 hours. So next slide, please. So we would expect to have also, well, of course, in the US, more extreme weather events like hurricanes and heavy storms than in Western Europe. We suffered last year, well, in 2020, sorry, we suffered Storm Isaias in the northeast. That was one of the strongest tropical cyclones since Rita in 2005. 3 million customers were affected. Half of them were in New Jersey. In our service territory, that was impacted here, mainly Connecticut and some areas of the state of New York. We had 340K customers impacted, and 53% were recovered in 24 hours, and 75% were restored in 48 hours. So shall we move on, please? And because we're going to show here in the next slide the evolution of the recovery. Here's the restoration curve. Okay, so we are showing here, for those of you that are not familiar with this kind of curves. So we are showing here in the y-axis the number of customers that were impacted by each of the three events that I have shown before, and this is on the y-axis. And in the x-axis, we are showing here the number of hours that they didn't have electricity, these customers. So first of all, let me say we cannot compare directly each event because they were totally different. Okay, in terms of well, for example, in the case of Spain, we didn't have wind after the snowfall. Okay, but what we see here is clearly that recovery was much quicker in Spain and in the UK than in the US. And this is linked with first of all with resiliency and with grid hardening and automation of the grid. But this is, in fact, but the problems, they are not only just a question of resiliency and what we are really focusing in Iberdrola and the rest of the utilities. So electricity grids must be ready for the energy transition. That means we need to cope with more integration of renewables at the distribution grid, electrification of transport and heat, and clearly customer empowerment. So if we try to split all our investments in like two big boxes, okay, we would say that the 18 billion of investments that we are having in networks and electricity in networks in Iberdrola from 2021 to 2025, we're circa spending 11 million euros in resiliency, grid modernization, okay, and hardening, and close to 8 billion euros in digitization and electrification that really allow us to cope with the energy transition and to integrate more resources and give this kind of customer empowerment. So if you see also in terms of the areas, there are very significant investments in the four countries where we operate, but it's worth noting the weight of the US, mainly due to the weather events, to the severe weather events, and also the situation of the grid. And finally, the next and the last slide, okay? So please. Thank you. So, well, the greater dependency of society on electricity increases the importance of resilience. Of course, large investments will be needed to enable the energy transition, also a net zero in 2050. But the current situation in each jurisdiction, we must recognize, is different because, as we said before, weather events, the kind of weather events, and the situation of the grid. So right now, our focus in the US and Brazil is resiliency and also digitalization, and everywhere in the four countries, also our focus is on being able to cope with the challenging targets of the energy transition. The good news here is that there's a clear regulatory implication that is moving in the right direction. And we can put some examples in terms, for example, the use of EU funds for grid reinforcement for ultra-fast charging stations in Spain and grid digitalization, or a green recovery fund in the UK that gives a clear signal for the next price control of that we must address the challenges of net zero at electricity networks, or the bipartisan infrastructure bill that recognized in the US $15 billion in resiliency and smart grids, or also the resiliency and compensation bill, for example, in New York, and also we have another resiliency bill in Connecticut, or the new regulatory framework in order to promote digitization of networks, integration of distributed resources, demand response, and microgrids in Brazil. So as I said in the beginning, each country is in a different situation, but solutions are very similar. What is absolutely the same everywhere is the need of a frank partnership between companies and regulators to have resilient grids that are able to cope with the energy transition goals. Thank you very much.
Juan, that was great. And I think we'll go ahead with one question for you before we go on to the panel, just because I think it's very prevalent. Nikos had a very good question, which you started to answer there at the end, talking about the regulatory treatment in the different countries that Iberdrola operates. I'm wondering, as a kind of a follow-up to Nikos's question, are there any, regulators love to do cost benefit analysis on your investments and show that they, that the benefits are there, and for rare events that many of these resiliency issues are associated with, the value, the benefit side of the equation when you're justifying those investments. Is there any new approaches that you're seeing Iberdrola taking, or that are on kind of the justification side for these investments in resiliency for rare events?
Well, in fact, in the areas where we operate right now, there's, I would say, nothing specific for resiliency. We are more or less in the same situation as Torsten has said for E.ON. That the reality, so in fact, of course we got resiliency plans in the jurisdiction, each jurisdictions, but somehow they're embedded in, we could say, in the whole capital plan of a rate case everywhere, so in all countries. What we have now, and this is quite new, for example, in New York, is the resiliency and compensation bill that establishes some kind of penalties for if we are not able to recover customers in more than 72 hours and well, several things, but also put the obligation, this is very positive, the obligation on electricity company, on utilities, to work on a vulnerability analysis that would have to be delivered in 18 months. And this vulnerability analysis, of course, will come with solutions, with a capital plan. So this bill allows us to, well, once approved, this capital plan, we will start investing on that, and automatically will be recovered, well, supposedly automatically will be recovered in rates. So this kind of a specific mechanism for resiliency, well, we're starting to have that in New York, but we don't have that in the rest of the jurisdiction where we operate. On the other side, this also addresses what we have seen before. So that the situation is not the same in Western Europe than in the US because of weather events, and second, because also of the current situation of the infrastructure, which is older and with more age in the US than in Europe.